The subject of ITAR seems a staple in every space conference, but hopefully with some recent developments, we may be seeing the potential for some change. To bring us the latest from Washington, we are pleased to welcome two individuals who spend much of their professional lives on the subject, two friends and partners of the Space Foundation in addressing this issue. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Brendan Curry, Vice President of the Washington Operations for the Space Foundation, and Mr. Frank Slazer, Vice President of Space Systems from the Aerospace Industries Association. We look forward to your discussion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not Pat Cooper, as you can tell. Pat had some weather trouble precluding her from joining us today, so I am filling in for her place. But I'm happy to introduce my friend and colleague here, Frank Slazer. Frank and I have been in the industry for a number of years together and been grappling with this issue for a long, long time, as we all have. So I want to just give a brief introduction to Frank and let Frank make his presentation. He's got some slides. And then I just have a couple scribbled remarks that I think are some items we may want to think about or contemplate as we are trying to, as I say, deliver this baby, ITAR reform, deliver this baby safe and sound. Frank, as you all know, is Vice President of Space Systems at AIA, Aerospace Industries Association. And before that, he developed and implemented business development strategies across the NASA civil space market for Northrop Grumman Aerospace Systems and was Director for Civil Space Development at United Launch Alliance, as well as the Boeing Company. He earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in Aerospace Engineering and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from Syracuse. So you're an Orangeman, I didn't know that.
In mourning still.
Yeah. And a Master's of Business Administration from UC Irvine. So Frank?
Well, thank you very much. And you can't really see the audience too well from up here, but I'll tell you, if you really wanted to come up with a topic that's going to sound so dry that people won't show up for it, this is probably it. But nonetheless, it's an important topic and one that's had some rare positive developments from Washington, something that we are short of these days. So I'm going to try to explain a little bit about the background, about the export control rules that have been in place for about the last almost 14 years, and some changes that are underway right now that should greatly help satellite exports. First is, and I won't go through the whole long background on it, but there was some issues back in the 1990s where there was a concern by Congress that U.S. satellite technology, U.S. launch technology, was being improperly disclosed to other countries, in particular to China, after a couple of launch failures that happened in China while they were trying to launch U.S. satellites. And as a reaction to that, in the Strom-Thurmond National Defense Authorization Act in 1999, a section was put in there that essentially said, notwithstanding any other provision of law, all satellites and related items, and mind you, all satellites and related items that are on the Commerce Control List of dual-use items in the Export Administration Regulations, I'll skip the regulation number, or the date of enactment of this act shall be transferred to the United States Munitions List. So what that basically did was it took all satellite technology, or even things that aren't specifically satellite technology, like connectors or fasteners or things that might be used on a satellite but generally available commercially in other places, and put them on a list that required the same level of licensing as if you were trying to export munitions. Needless to say, that created a bit of a disruption in the industry and a loss of sales. So AIA represents about 360 companies. By sales volume, we represent about 90+% of the industry. And many of those companies are satellite companies or second and third tier providers of components and technology that go into satellites. And so what we decided to do was just basically talk to our members and try to survey them about how ITAR had been impacting them. We put out a report last year called Competing for Space, which I conveniently forgot to bring a copy up on the stage here, but you can get it from our website, competingforspace at aia.org. The whole study really kind of revolved around some survey results that were really very, not surprising to those of us in the industry, very discouraging, however. The firms we interviewed and surveyed represented about 75% of U.S. total sales of satellites and satellite technology. 100% of these firms had indicated that export control restrictions had adversely impacted their business. Over 90% indicated that export controls were adversing U.S. industrial base capabilities, which is even more unsettling when I get into my next chart. Over 70% of respondents said they could directly attribute lost sales due to the restrictive ITAR regulations because of delays due to regulatory approval processing time, higher costs associated with regulatory compliance, and also increased risks and costs limiting pursuits of new business opportunities. There were also instances cited where international partners didn't want to engage with U.S. suppliers, primarily because once they had any U.S. element on their product, then the whole satellite became an ITAR-controlled item. And of course, if you're an international company and you've got a very diverse customer base, you may not want that limitation on you. And there we go. So why does this matter? Well, the answer is right now, it matters more than ever. I mean, we've been working to try to educate the Congress and the administrations of the last 12, 13 years about the impact this has been having on the industrial base and on lost sales. AIA did a calculation around the spring of last year. We think we may have lost about $20 billion in sales over that time frame, and tens of thousands of jobs in that same time frame. At the same time, now we're coming into a different time for national security and civil space budgets on the national level, which are still a very big part of the U.S. space economy. And public national security budgets, just the public ones, not the classified ones, declined by 18% in the last fiscal year, continuing final budget CR appropriation. DoD now is facing about $1 trillion in budget cuts in the next decade, and so space programs in the military side are going to continue to be under pressure. NASA and civil space programs have their own challenges and are going to have also continuing budget pressures because of the fiscal climate we're in right now. Just this last year, nearly $800 million was cut from NASA in the FY13 budget sequester process. And we got a president's budget out today, which looks much better, but it also could wind up being subject to a sequester because they may not come to an agreement with the Congress. And then space capabilities continue to be more important worldwide. Rogue states such as Iran and North Korea are now acquiring space and launch capabilities. And really, space has just proliferated around the world as something that they see, other nations see what a value this is to their militaries and to their understanding of what their potential adversaries are doing. And so they're developing their own capabilities. And that means we need to stay ahead of the curve on that as we have for the last 50 years, essentially. And it's something that requires a healthy industrial base to do. So increased satellite-related exports in this context can help sustain the industrial base while also providing good jobs. The good news is, again, after a long process of trying to educate the Congress and the administrations over the last 2 years, a process was kicked off that has finally brought some relief. And in the FY 2013 National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, there was basically a repeal of the subsection quoted earlier regarding the putting satellites and related technologies on the munitions control list. And in particular, though, there was a very careful constraint on removing, basically exporting to China, specifically to China, also North Korea, Iran, Syria, countries of concern to our national security. And so those are still subject to the USML regulations. There are some reports the administration needs to provide to the Congress prior to implementing this, but we are now on a trajectory where by this time next year, it is very likely that the satellites will be back on the Commerce Control List, and so it'll greatly facilitate international sales and international partnerships. And this will also have a benefit for the scientific and technical community. Besides just the commercial sales of this technology, the ITAR regulations has had a chilling effect on international scientific technical cooperation, making it much more difficult. And this will go a long way to help with that. So the timeline it kind of runs like this. Spring 2013, and I'd like to say April, because that's what we've heard from the Commerce Department, but we know things in Washington do slip. But spring 2013, they should have the draft rules published in the Federal Register. And then public comments will be due 45 days later. After that, and probably in the fall time frame, the final USML and Commerce Control List rules will be published. And then there's a 180-day transition period. And during that time, there's going to be a formal notification of Congress with a list of items that will be removed from the USML. Again, spring 2014, should all enter into force. And so given the procurement times that it takes for satellites and technical systems to be planned and procured and acquired, it's not too soon to start thinking now, once these draft rules come out, about how you can start utilizing those to expand your sales opportunities or scientific cooperation. So the applicability of the NDAA, again, commercial communications satellites, now eligible for transfer to the commerce list, pending the draft rules. Scientific experimental research and other spacecraft are also now eligible for transfer. Launch vehicles, however, were not. There's actually a different regime that's out there, the ballistic missile control regime that is slightly different and basically launch vehicles were not addressed in this different piece of legislation and different set of challenges. So what to do now? Well, for industry, there's some very important compliances out there. First of all, nothing's changed. I mean, nothing has formally changed yet. This is all draft. This is all for for comment and for congressional review and final consideration. And so you need to comply with all current licensing requirements. However, start to begin to prepare for the public comment period. The Commerce Department, the State Department really will listen to these inputs. And so review the legislative text and conference report for the FY13 National Defense Authorization Act, as well as the final Section 1248 report provided by the White House. You get that from the Executive Office of the President, most likely under Office of Science and Technology Policy. And then once the draft rules are published, file comments, positive and in support, or additional modifications or concerns. Continue monitoring the implementation process. Look for the draft rules in the late spring. Track issuance of final rules and congressional notification. And then finally, you can start communicating these changes to customers. We're not sure yet how this is going to work out because there's a lot of questions about travel, but we are hopeful at AIA that by the time of the Paris Air Show, we may be able to have an event where we can have a little discussion of the draft rules, which should be out by that time, to help begin spreading the word amongst international customers of how the U.S. regulations are changing. And so for more information, I'll just refer you to two organizations, and actually 3 organizations should be mentioned here. I do want to mention Patricia Cooper was not able to make it because of the snow yesterday in Denver, but Satellite Industries Association and Aerospace Industries Association have worked in this hand in hand for the last decade to bring these into place, and also the Space Foundation, has done a lot of work in terms of trying to understand the impact on the supplier base in terms of educating the decision makers on the national level. So it's really been an industry and an association team effort that has led to this actually good news for the industry, and I want to thank our partners.
Well, thanks, Frank. Great update for everyone. Appreciate it. And some of the things that we've been thinking about and cogitating on is that what does all this change mean for our friends and allies? And I think all of us who are concerned about this issue need to maintain open and routine comms with our friends and allies on how we move forward. As Frank said, this hasn't been fixed yet. We're on a momentum and on a trajectory that's getting us to where I think we all want to be. There is still going to be opportunities for Congress to get involved further as well. There's the defense authorization bills are going to go through this year. There's going to be a NASA authorization bill effort made this year, as well as the various appropriations bills that we all need to be focused on, and so we need to be cognizant of that. The other thing I would suggest to the community is that all we need is one bad event to set us back to square one, and then we're going to be in trouble again. And we got a great trajectory going forward now, but we can't count our eggs till they're all hatched, obviously. Also, we've been trying to talk a little bit more about cyber issues at the symposium, and if you were able to take part in the cyber agenda that we had on Monday, you kept hearing routinely that cyber is a venue for espionage efforts, and if we have a major cyber espionage effort that goes bad, or we find out about, there could be an ITAR hook to that to once again sets us back to. You'll see congressional activity taking place in a manner that may not be helpful for us. And the other thing is that Congress, and I'm a former congressional staffer, so I can say this, and I'm a recovering lawyer, so I have that going against me as well. The law is always very slow to keep up with the pace of technology. And I would hope that when we get through this process, we can have mechanisms in place that will result in the law and the policy of the land keeping pace automatically almost with technology and the pace of innovation. And so we don't see things proceeding over a number of years that result in us having to revisit literally acts of Congress and need acts of Congress to take place to reform ITAR and reform and modernize export control efforts. One other thing that, in talking with folks, is that the satellite and space componentry was what was called Category 15, from what I understand. And while that has been in the 1248 report, there's another category, Category 11, dealing with software. And now we've been hearing from industry that how software is so intrinsic into a lot of what the satellite and space componentry is that if there's a hang-up with respect to ITAR reform on Category 11, that could drag Category 15 modernization efforts into some problematic areas. So those are some of the remarks I have so far. And I'm just looking at my iPad here.
It's always easier to say no in our system.
Yeah, that's true as well. Here's one question, Frank. Why is it okay to relax ITAR now? What concern has been alleviated?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. First of all, the issue that the original sin that created this situation was not actually satellite related. The concern was that some launch vehicle failures had happened and that some U.S. companies had helped in assessing launch failure modes. And of course, the same kind of technology that's used to launch satellites by the Chinese is used for ballistic missiles. And so the concern was really that industry and the government at the time, the Clinton administration, was not being sufficiently diligent in regulating this technology. So relative to satellites, not much. But part of it, not much was involved at that time, but part of it is the globalization of space. Many of the same technologies that are on the Commerce Control List are also available from European and Asian suppliers. And in fact, some effort has been made by some nations or some companies internationally to develop ITAR-free satellites that can function completely without US components. And so while and there still are some technologies that are on the munitions list because they're sensitive relative to national security applications, a lot of this is really being mainstreamed. It's really getting to the point where, just as you're seeing in commercial crew and commercial cargo, things that were once only the province of government are now becoming part of everyday commerce. And so if we retain overly restrictive rules on technologies that are broadly available in the commercial marketplace internationally, we won't prevent bad actors from getting that technology. Instead, we'll just wind up hurting our industry and our industrial base ability to stay ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue of modernization and reform has been ripe for a while, and I'm glad we actually got it through. I think there's a lot of people that were skeptical of it getting through last year, considering it was an election year and everything like that.
After 12 years, lots of skepticism was warranted.
Yeah, seriously. Well, we got just a little bit, 2 minutes left, and but we haven't got any really more questions, and I know it's late in the day, so do you have any other comments, Frank?
No, but thank you for your interest, and thanks for the opportunity.
No, glad to be here, and thanks for all you being here, and thanks for supporting the symposium, and see you in a bit. Thank you.